Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Revelations about disgraced movie director Harvey Weinstein's abuse of women sparked a global reckoning with predatory male behaviour. But 5 years on from what became known as the MeToo movement, there's a growing backlash. Some influential people argue it's become divisive, pitting the sexes against each other with an assumption of male guilt, leaving many young men feeling marginalised. Recently interviewed two people at the forefront of that backlash, albeit with very different styles and rationales. He's psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson.
People have been after me for a long time because I've been speaking to disaffected young men. You know, what a terrible thing to do that is.
And earlier this week, I spoke to Andrew Tate, the so-called toxic male influencer who's now banned from social media. The full explosive interview airs tomorrow night, but here's a little taster of that.
I believe that confident, strong men who stand up and protect and provide for women are a good thing for the world and a good force for the world. And I don't think that I put a magic spell on anybody. I think there's a whole bunch of men in the world who understands my value. And if men grow up to be like me, you're gonna have a whole bunch of people with no criminal record, dedicated athletes, who protect and provide for the people close to them, are fantastic for the economy. And I'm certainly not the worst influence out here, Piers.
Well, clips of both of those interviews have exploded online. Literally millions of people have been viewing them. Jordan Peterson, for example, the whole interview has been viewed 5.5 million times on our YouTube channels, rightly or wrongly. There's clearly a huge groundswell of interest, at the very least, in their views, if not support. So was Me Too an overdue reckoning, or has it become a damaging battle in a raging culture war? Isabel still with me, plus political journalist Ava Santina, conservative commentator, a young man who agrees with Peterson and Andrew Tate, Connor Tomlinson. Connor, welcome to the show. I'll start with you. I found it very interesting interviewing Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate, both very controversial characters in different ways, both positioned as a kind of kings of toxic masculinity. I certainly didn't think Jordan Peterson was that. And when it came to Andrew Tate, I couldn't really conclude after 90 minutes of grilling him. I gave him quite a hard time. I couldn't really conclude what he had done that was so bad that he had to be expunged from social media life altogether. But it showed me the sensitivity around all this. And if any man now behaves in a way that looks like it's toxic masculinity, bang, they're expunged. Is in that process masculinity itself getting expunged and demonised?
I would say so. I mean, I'm sure that you'll have this experience with your own relationships, Piers, in that women, if you say something controversial, whether it's something on the Peterson side of the spectrum or on the Tate side of the spectrum, a little bit more explosive or a little bit more academic, some women are very much drawn to a man who can be a bit more confrontational, say exactly what he thinks. It's the verbal new version of what gladiators used to do in the arena way back.
Well, certainly, I think Ava and Isabel are laughing because they know that they're drawn to me in that way because of my combative nature. But Ava, you're smirking and laughing. I mean, there's a serious point here. A lot of young men feel they're getting disenfranchised by society. They're all being over-demonised, that any attempt to be the traditional male figure is now being rubbished and called toxic.
Well, I mean, if you really felt that and you really went out there and you were an alpha male, then you wouldn't be bothered about a bunch of women telling you that you were...
Well, you would if you get cancelled, like Andrew Tate, if you get banned from every social media platform.
I mean, he's hardly been cancelled. He was on your programme, which is on national television.
But it's the only platform, actually, he's had for a long time because all the social media companies banned him, literally banned him. He had his email gone, his Google gone, his Facebook gone. It all went down like dominoes.
Well, he's still on there, very, very prolific on there. I can't move for clips of him.
Yeah, but they're not generated by him now.
Well, but that's been for quite some time.
But should he be punished that way?
But what is punished? What is punished?
Punished is where companies take a decision which, in my view, in this case, was perverse because they still allow, for example, the Ayatollah of Iran to have a Twitter account.
Yes.
So there's no consistency here at all.
Well, but however, we love a bit of free market. I'm sure you do, judging by that suit, which is lovely. But, you know, social media companies are private companies.
You're not objectifying, please.
They can do whatever
I'll take all the objectification I like.
Of course you will, yeah. All right, Isabel.
But Ava, your point about, you know, if men were that alpha, then they wouldn't be that bothered by this, doesn't really help us when it comes to boys growing up. And that is one of my worries, that for teenage boys now, they are so terrified of the consequences of putting a foot out of line. It's hard enough being a young teenager, working out how things are, working out how to do dating and all of that, without the terror that if you touch in the wrong place at the wrong time, you may find that your whole life is destroyed.
See, I
and there
like
is
that
far
terror.
too much Well,
I like that.
As a
I
mother
think
of
that
a
men
teenage
should be
boy, I
frightened.
don't like
Really?
that
That's the
terror.
most
I do.
malicious thing I've ever heard.
That is
I think that
awful.
men should be frightened
I think
to
you'd
touch
feel
women in a way
differently
that
if you
they're
were,
not
if you
comfortable
were.
with.
But we're talking about
Yeah, but we're not
teenage
talking
years,
about. We're
children.
not talking about.
We're talking
but
about
it's an
young
interesting
children.
thing that you see. I would say that attitude actually is part of the problem too. That is that's to me toxic femininity.
It is.
That is saying you should all be terrified, you men, if you put one.
Of assaulting.
Well, I think we all understand what sexual
What is
assault
an
is.
assault?
What Isabel's talking about is that young teenage clumsiness
really
in many
hard.
cases, which is now being recategorised as assault. Is that a problem?
It's not being recategorised as assault. It's always been assault. It's just we're finally talking about it.
I don't agree with that.
That's
But to-
ridiculous.
Teenage boy fumbling with
A touch
teenage
on the
girl
knee.
is not,
Not
it's
even
not
that.
in most cases assault, is
Do
it?
you remember Aziz Ansari, right? Hot off the heels of MeToo, hot off the heels of Harvey Weinstein rightly being dragged through the courts, and he should have got way worse than just prison time, in my opinion. Aziz Ansari had a consensual relationship with a woman. She felt a bit awkward, and afterwards rescinded consent, and he was lumped in, and he had his
No,
career
I'm with you on that
largely
one.
cancelled.
I'm with
so
you.
then why should men be afraid of that?
Because he didn't touch her without consent, did he?
No, but she
But
rescinded his consent, and
how are
she
young
saw
boys
that then
supposed to
as the same
navigate
thing.
this, the whole
Yeah, I
thing?
agree.
I'm thinking
Well, you
of
need
my
to have-
teenage son. You know, he's 14, 15. What's he supposed to say? Would you mind if I put
Isabel,
my
you are an
hand- I mean,
extremely
come
strong
on,
woman. I
come
know
on.
in your house you're teaching them the difference between assault and then
Of
coming
course,
on to
of
someone.
course.
I know you are.
But what we're talking about is it's been very interesting watching the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, how it's all developed. Because a lot of very bad people, Harvey Weinstein and others, got their due comeuppance. We can all agree with that.
Yeah.
This is not even something to be debated. We're really talking about the grey line, right? Where is that grey line? How do you navigate it? When you're an experienced adult and you've been around the block in many ways, you can navigate that much more intelligently and with emotional intelligence than you can if you're a teenage boy. And I think the point Isabel makes is a good one. I've had 3 sons in their 20s. I've always taught them to be respectful to women, and I believe they are. But I do think it's really hard for a 16, 17-year-old boy now in this environment to know even how to start
they are all
having some
terrified.
kind of physical relationship with a woman.
Those good boys are all terrified. I know that from talking to my son. He's just like, I'm just not going there. Is that healthy?
Yes, I think it is actually. I think it's better to not have a physical relationship than to have one that could ruin a woman's life.
But then how do they ever start?
Well, don't. If you're not 100% sure,
What? Are we going
don't.
for-
What are you going to have? A bunch of Newton
Celebrate.
boys who
But
never
it's
had...
so obvious.
We actually
It's
do
sort
have
of
that.
like-
Gen Z is having far less sexual relationships
Yes,
than any
they
ever before.
are. It's true.
And
young
hang
people
on.
have stopped having sex.
I agree with the first part of your sentence, actually. If you're not willing to have a sexual relationship with clearly defined lines, don't have one. And so I actually told my mates at university, don't sleep around with girls. 1, girls don't bring a guy home that you don't know what he's capable of. 2, guys, don't bring a girl home if you think that possibly she could have a false accusation against you.
Can I make another point here?
Which I
think-
find... I mean, look, that
What?
sentence to me, when I was your age, right? How old are you?
23.
23. When I was your age, the idea you would even have that sort of thought process
Yeah, I
would
wouldn't
be
have those sort of
unthinkable.
mates that would ever cross the line, so I wouldn't have to have that
I never
conversation
said my
with any
mates.
of my friends.
Don't throw my mates in with a bunch of violent people.
And is there
That's-
a certain purity here I'm detecting in a certain type of feminist who thinks that they're all unimpeachable and that this is all one-way traffic and that
quite.
only men can be toxic?
No, I
Because
don't
I've got
think
to
that.
enlighten you. I've met quite a few women in my life who are pretty toxic themselves, and I don't
Absolutely.
see the debate being framed around that at all.
No, but the point is that we're still in a situation where only 5% of rape cases actually even go to trial.
Which is ridiculous.
But that's the
Right.
extreme end of it,
Yeah.
isn't
The
it?
idea-
You're talking
but
about
I'm
rape
talking
here.
about-
David, we can all agree
assault.
that's wrong. We can all agree that's wrong.
But okay, so even on the extreme end of it, rape doesn't even go to trial. If you're assaulted, and that is life-changing.
Yeah.
What happened to Rose McGowan
Yeah.
was with Harvey
I
Weinstein
know Rose well.
was
Yeah, but these are
life-changing,
extreme
and
things.
she didn't get her comeuppance.
Yeah, but
She
Ava, we'd
lost
all
her
agree about
career.
that. Well, I think what has sent a shudder through all of our spines from your mouth today is the line that all young men should be terrified of any physical
assaulting
contact.
someone.
Well, no, you didn't say it like
didn't
that.
say that.
You said basically of starting any physical contact with a
Unless
woman.
you're sure.
Well,
Unless
how
you're
does a
How are you
16,
supposed to
17-year-old
be
boy
sure
know?
when she can rescind consent on something completely nebulous.
Okay, can I ask you this? If you were going to take someone to bed and you weren't 100% sure that they wanted to go to bed with you, would you go with
No,
them?
I would not do that.
Then
But the
that's what
point
I'm
was,
talking
Aziz
about.
Ansari was sure, for example, and then later she went and published a long piece
Right.
about how she regretted it and lumped him in with Harvey Weinstein.
I mean,
Is that okay?
Ava,
No.
Ava, do you feel
Thank
any of it, Ava's gone too far? Do you think the pendulum has gone too far at all?
No. No, I don't think it's gone far enough, actually.
Really?
I don't think we've brought anything into schools. To your point, we haven't brought any teaching into school about what is assault, what isn't. If you're worried about, like, 16-year-old boys not understanding what it is, bring in sexual health lessons. Teach it.
The idea that you can teach rapists not to rape is insane, because they already know.
What do you mean?
That it's illegal. Okay, right. You're saying if boys wouldn't know what's assault and what isn't.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. The idea that rather than taking the power out of someone who can make a false accusation is what they're actually, most of them are concerned about. Specifically, my friends, for example, who would never dream of doing something like that. But then what the feminists fail to understand is you can educate
The
evils.
feminists.
Did you not identify yourself as a feminist study?
No, I didn't, actually.
Oh, okay,
Piers
sorry.
called me that.
Piers
You're not a
did, so then
feminist?
that's...
But Piers labelled me.
Actually, I
as
called
that.
you a toxic feminist.
Okay, then if that's my
I'll take that.
That's
Yeah, of
wrong.
course.
Fair enough. But you cannot, if a rapist is willing to violate the law so violently, you cannot teach him out of that. All you can have is very harsh punishments to deter
No, because
that.
you're talking about the grey line, and the grey line is at parties of not understanding that when a woman is so inebriated that she can't stand up, boys need to understand that is
Well,
no.
that's a different
Now
line.
you're
That's a completely
bringing in
different line.
something else. Ava, I would like
Yeah.
to know whether you accept that women, and particularly teenage girls and young women, sometimes give out pretty mixed signals. They give out mixed messages. They're not even sure what they want at any given time.
I think we're victim blaming.
I don't think
I think
that's
we're- I
victim.
think
Look,
we're-
Come off
so
it,
do
Ava.
you
We
I think we are
accept?
straying into
do
a
you-
Come off
point.
it. Every
you-
sinew of your body knows what she just said.
Do you
has a
accept
merit
women
to it.
can sometimes
It's a woman
give off
saying it
mixed
too. Come on.
messages? Come on, they
Look,
can.
I mean, sure, but
That's a
I'm not.
non-denial.
But I'm sure,
Yeah.
but I'm talking about assault.
So how are you
Yeah, but
supposed
I
to?
don't think any of us disagree about assault. We're talking about the far greyer line of young teenage fumblings.
Yeah, exactly
And if they've all stopped having sex, it's because they are actually terrified. And I think it's a great shame if they're terrified into actually having no physical interaction with opposite
Exactly
sex.
that. And then the
How do
other
we get
point,
past
can
that?
I make one other point, which is this whole thing of dredging up allegations that are 10 or 20 years old, I think is absolutely awful.
Why?
Because it's a he said, she
Oh,
said. It's
Isabel,
impossible to
why?
prove. And there are people whose careers are, and their lives are completely
not really-
ruined by allegations that are brought a decade or more after the event. Now, obviously, if the person was a minor at the time of the incident, or the alleged incident,
I
then
can't believe you're
fine.
saying this,
There
that we
shouldn't be
shouldn't
a
bring up historic assault claims.
I don't
That's
think-
absolutely
I don't think
crazy.
you should be bringing-
Women who
I
would have been
don't-
too afraid to confront it at the time because they
Why?
were too young or too
Right.
powerless
I
to
said
bring it
about-
up in
I
the
said
first
about-
place.
See,
Youth-
I would actually side slightly with Ava here in the sense that I don't have a problem with historic crimes. For example, Harvey Weinstein, they're all
There's
historic.
gotta be a cut-off
yeah, but,
point that
yeah, but,
hasn't
well,
there?
has there actually?
Should be.
For someone
I
like
think there
Harvey,
has, because it
for someone like
depends
Harvey
on the
Weinstein,
evidence.
should there be a cut-off point, or should the victims who were all bullied and scared
I think it
to come
depends
forward,
what the,
right?
I think it depends on the severity of the allegation. Obviously, if it's something, you know,
Right.
it's a rape case or something. But if it is a, you know, he put his
All right,
hand on my knee.
You're talking about the
you know.
journalist movement.
I'm
the
basically-
journalists that bravely came forward and told about how cabinet ministers had touched them inappropriately
their
on the
knee.
knee, which was
I'm
horrendous.
not
Yes.
bothered about touching on a knee. I mean, what, 20 years later?
Yes,
that
but she
someone should be dragged
exposed
through the courts
entire
for that.
sexual harassment culture that is in Westminster and is still really pervasive at the moment.
Well, the good thing is we've all reached complete agreement after 5 years of the Me Too movement. But it's interesting, isn't it? So we've got lots of different views here. It is complicated, I think. And I would argue, but maybe a man shouldn't argue this at all, but I would argue the pendulum may have swung a little too far. You don't think it's swung far enough. You probably are on my side. You probably are too. But I'm not sure we should really be taking sides either. It's a complex minefield. And I think that when you start using phrases like you should be terrified, nobody should be terrified on any side of this, I don't think. Would
Not
be where
unless
I'd
they
put you
have
up on
criminal intent. That's all.
that. But good debate. Thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it.